Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do is get prepared, get ready for finalizing these models you're working on. The first thing I wanted to talk about was a little bit about organization. And so right now I have this object made up of 5 different cubes, and they're all named cube, right? Make sure that you're going into these things and labeling them, so we know which one is what. And label those very nicely. The other thing is that once you have a group of objects and you want to start to move them around together and work on them all as one, you can always drop in what's called a null object. So if you go to objects and you select null object, it's kind of how it sounds. It's like a nothing object, but it helps us to categorize things better. So what I can do here is I can select all of these objects, right? And I can drag them into the null object. And now I can take this and move it all as one piece. Okay? So it's just sort of categorizing, it's making a parent for this relationship of all these cubes, because otherwise you have to select them all and move them all individually. But this allows you, let's say you needed to rotate it slightly or move it around, you can create that null object and label it as well. So you can label this whatever you think. Call that abstract, so that you can label it in those forms. All right, another thing I want to talk about was lighting. Okay, it's good when you work with your materials. It's often good to give yourself a sense of lighting in the scene, so you can dictate how those materials are really working. The first thing that I like to do is drop in a floor. So if you go to Objects and down to Scene, and then just drop in a floor right here, it's going to help out a lot. The floor is going to be oriented at 0. So often what I'll do is just open up the front view and take that floor and just drop it down to the bottom of your model so you can see where that thing lies. Right about there is good. Okay, and that gives you a base to work from. You can really see how it's going to interact. The other thing is we want to drop some lighting into here. I guess I might as well give myself a material to work from. So let's just grab a quick material here. I guess I like this one. That's pretty good. Alright, I'm going to drop this on the whole abstract. The other thing that's nice about the null object is if I wanted all the colors on all of these cubes, I wouldn't have to drop them individually. I could put them on the null object that I called abstract, and it will apply it to all those views. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about lights. The first thing is there's a bunch of different types of lights. The easiest one to work with to begin with is just the Omni Light, and if you drop that in, again, it's going to drop it in at 0. So what I like to do is kind of zoom out in the editor a bit so you can see where this light is going. I like to bring it up, above the model, and then also bring it out in front of the model a little bit so you can get some depth and dimension working here, and that's going to help out a lot. Now when we preview this in the editor, you can see that the floor just gives us this nice kind of ground to work from. It sort of slowly fades the background. It's a nice clear view of the model. One thing we noticed too is there isn't any shadows yet. So the light that we drop in, we need to apply some of those functions to. So if we click on Light in the Objects Manager and go down to the Attributes Manager, you can click on Shadow and grab a light. So the soft shadow is what I'm going to select because I like the way that it works. Sort of a nice, even sort of cast. That black's a little bit harsh for me, so I'm going to change the color of the shadow. In the Attributes Manager, you can just click on that. I like to have a little bit of a blue-gray for the shadows. I think that looks a little bit more naturalistic. There we go. So now I have this object floating in space above my floor, and it's oriented with a nice lighting, a nice scene in that sort of space. So that's a good way of dealing with the basic lighting. Now there's some other lighting options that you can play with as well. So if I get rid of this light right here, if you go to the content browser, and this is the same place you found those materials in, we can also go to light setups. And there's a couple of them that I think are pretty good. One is this the 3-point light stage. If you just double click this, it's going to drop that into your scene. And what this is going to do is it's going to give you, let's just zoom out here so we can see a little bit. It's going to give you a few different lights. All right, so there we go. If you look at this, in the front view, you see there's two lights that are interacting in this scene. It creates a nice little stage for you and sets up a really nice combination of things. You can also click, you can open that up and click on those individual lights and see what types of lights they're working with. But if we view this now, you can see that it's pretty intense, but there's a nice sort of sense of lighting in the object and scene as well. Now, if I wanted to, I could go into these lights and under General, you could change the intensity. So if I brought that one down to 50, if I brought this one down to 50, and maybe that fill light down to, there we go. So you can really control the way that the thing is lit according to the scene as well. So that's that's another way of working with that those lighting. You can always bring in a prefab sort of light and control it according to the scene. So that's a possibility. Kind of liked my original lighting, just slightly better there. So I'm going to go back to that. Bring this up and bring this forward a little bit there. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now that I have, let's say I have my finished object. I'm ready to go here. Let's just preview this again, see how we're doing. Going to make sure I give myself a shadow one more time. Let's see. All right, so I'm satisfied with this. Now what I'm going to do is export it. So what I want you to do for your final output is obviously save the model in the shared drive, the Cinema 4D model, but I also want you to export 3 JPEGs at 3 different angles for each one of the objects. So you're gonna have a total of 6 JPEGs altogether. All right. So the first thing, and what I want to do is I want to get a few different views so we can see the different perspectives of this object. So I'm going to you can orient the object in the editor just how you like it perceived. You can always get a render preview. If that looks pretty good for you, then we can move forward. What we're going to do next is there's a series of these little chop bars. Obviously, the one on the left is the render preview. The one on the right is the render settings. And now this is important. So follow along. The first one that we start with is the general one. We want to make sure that we have a full render. Software preview is going to be what it looks like in the editor, and some of these other ones deal with different types of outputs. We want to have it on full render. The next one is output, and this you can designate the size and the ratio, and also when you're working with animation, the frame. So you could grab a specific frame, or you could do all the frames and make it animated. So there's a possibility there. Some of the basic presets are good for us to view. So for our purposes, we're going to just work with a relatively small output for now. So I'm just going to choose 800 by 600. That's a pretty good screen resolution to view these at. You could always choose anything larger. You can type in your own coordinates if you want as well. And so this right now is pixels. But again, you could do any sort of preset that you wanted in here, or you could type in your own. You could type in pixels, or you could type in inches or points. Anything that you want to follow. But for our purposes, I want to see all 6 should be 800 by 600 in the aspect ratio. Resolution 72 is fine. You can always change that for whatever it is you're working on. Make sure it says current frame here. So here you can choose, if you're working with an animation, you can choose all frames or a designated number of frames that you want to do for the output. The next one is save. So choose a path, and that where you're going to put this object. So I'm just going to choose the desktop, and I'm going to call this object test 1. All right. The next thing is choose what type of file. We're going to go down and choose a JPEG file. Okay. And then 24-bit dithering is what we want. We don't need an alpha channel. I'll talk about alpha channels a little bit later in the semester. So this looks pretty good. Once I have this all set up, just close it out, and then this button in the middle is the rendering button. It's render to the picture viewer. When you click on that, it's going to open up a new window, and it's going to go through its render process and save your file as you designated to the desktop. All right, so we can actually check that out now. Well, you don't want to see my purchase requisitions in my iTunes, right? So we should have somewhere, here we go. There's the object, and there's the view that we exported. Okay, so it's a nice clear JPEG exported out. Again, you can render this to any sort of size, but for the purposes of this project, just 800 by 600. It's a good screen size for us to view. So that's the first view, And then from there, all you'll need to do is move the camera around. Maybe you do a top view, side view. Make it so it's clear as to what your object is, and so you really fully understand it. So move that view around, and once you do that, you need to go back to your render settings. Call this Object Test 2. Close that out, and then again render it to the picture viewer, and you'll get a new view rendered out. Okay. So for Monday at the beginning of class, I want to make sure that you have both of your objects. Make sure there's materials, make sure there's lighting, make sure there's some sort of sense of ground that the object is sitting on, and have 3 JPEGs that show those different angles. We're going to pop up a nice slideshow of all the objects that everyone's done in class. Okay?